Hi, I'm Jolene Jang. Welcome to Women Who Go For It. It's a video series designed to empower and motivate women to step up and take action to lead happier lives. I interview intelligent, dynamic women. We look at their influences, their best practices, what they've learned along the way, and how they operate. When you watch these videos, look for one idea that you can use. You can test it for the next 2 weeks so you can elevate your level of happiness. Today's guest is Yvette Pegues. She is the former Miss Wheelchair USA and the current Miss Wheelchair International. And I would like to introduce her because you and I are all going to be in the same boat. We're going to be disabled, or someone around us is going to be disabled, and we're not going to know what to do. She is the author of The Art of Adaptability. And what she does in this book is essentially a manual on when this happens, what to expect, what you can do, what as a helper, what you need to know as the person with the disability, what you're going to go through. Would have been incredible to have this resource when my sister had a stroke last year, and still valuable now. She's a disability advocate and has many, many causes, and she's a fine example of making the most of her life now. She is doing sled hockey, which I don't know what that is, and horseback riding. I just saw a video on HLN on CNN, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, of her golfing. And she also posted out from the White House, I believe it was last week, on an initiative that she was supporting. She also helped in Haiti. I mean, she is a go-getter, regardless of any disability whatsoever. But I'm so glad to be able to share with you her, and I think you'll find her very motivating as well as logical, because when you are in that situation, you now have resources. Meet Yvette. Hi, I'm Jolene, the conference reporter with Women Who Go For It. We're with Yvette Pegues.
That's right, like the farm animals, pig and geese with a hard G in the middle,
Make it easy for us.
That's right.
So we're in Atlanta, and tell us about your Invisible Disability Group.
Absolutely. Your Invisible Disability Groups help people and their families, their caretakers, to live forward after a life-changing event. In most cases, that life-changing event would be a disability or a major diagnosis.
So in your case?
Yes. In my case, I became disabled 4 years ago, and there was no book. No one told me that.
There was no manual.
No manual, absolutely not. No one handed me a manual and said, so now you're disabled, this is what you do next. So that group really does help everyone to learn about the different resources that are available and how to just make sure the first 3, 6, and 9 months of a brand new disability is treated with some urgency, even if it's not the person with the disability, but family members who can support them in other ways.
As you talk about this, I'm thinking kind of like a branding. You were talking about, a new disability, so it's like a brand. There needs to be some publicity. There needs to be a manual. There needs to be a how-to.
Exactly.
So that's what you created.
Well, I have a book called The Art of Adaptability. Disability is big business. It's big business for the medical field. It's big business for insurance companies. It's big business all around. Because if you don't do what needs to be done in the first couple months of a disability, you lose services. And I know that personally. We were in denial for about a year. And so we said no to everything. Or we didn't even try to get the resources that were available to us. A year later, they were no longer available. There were hundreds of thousands of other people who needed it more.
And also, so my sister had a stroke recently, and those first few months are also pretty important to get on the right track for recovery.
That's right. That's right. Well, in my book, The Art of Adaptability, there are 4 4s for newly disabled and diagnosed persons. And one of the 4s is about your identity. You have to maintain your identity, because the whole purpose of the workbook is because I kept having to get talked off of a ledge after every doctor's appointment because I got the worst case scenario. And so there's only 10 minutes for these experts to come in and tell you what could or might happen. So if you lose your identity, then it changes every time you go to a different doctor. The second 4 is 4-2, and that's exactly what you're talking about. Getting the right people around you and making sure that you protect those relationships. And eventually, you get to the point where there's 4-3. 4, how long? Is it a temporary disability? How is this going to affect you? Do you have to move out or have family members move in? Do you have to be in a housing situation where there are professional caregivers? If you don't have that window of time, it's really hard to determine what you need. And then the final 4 is forgive. In my case, my condition was inherited. And so I may subconsciously have a problem with the fact that my mom passed it on to me because the condition being very unknown. It's called Arnold-Chiari malformation. And it's actually a brain malformation at the birth that I believe she also had at her death. It was never diagnosed.
Okay.
But now there's this sense that, wow, I should have known more. She should have shared her medical history with me. An even better example would be, imagine getting hit by a car, and never knowing who that was, and allowing that cancer of guilt and hate to kind of get in the way of your total recovery.
So this group is to help newbies and their families get a grip on what's happening and how to go through it and how to make the most of it.
Absolutely, to recognize that these resources are siloed. And don't ask for what you don't need, because it wastes time. And the other thing about the workbook is it's not just for families and people with disabilities, but for the medical community. So they know what we're going through, and also support groups.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that the medical community was taught to deal with emergencies and situations that bear a very complex existing situation. I've gone into emergency room situations and they have no idea how to treat me. And that's one of the hardest things in the medical community for people to do.
Yeah, like, no, please,
Right.
You're the expert.
Exactly. They're the expert on why I came in, a symptom, but not the condition, and how all those things interact. And that is huge, because you'll spend so much time, how do I say this, increasing your debt,
Yeah.
If you don't know your triggers, you don't know your resources, and you don't protect your relationships. In my case specifically, my husband became my caregiver. But guess what happened? I had no husband. He totally siloed in that one area of need, and there was no romance, there was no dating. He was focused on me getting better,
Right.
toileting me, changing me.
Right.
That's not very sexy, So about 3 years in, I had to fire him. It was New Year's Day, and we had our apple cider, and at the sound of midnight, I said, honey, I love you and you're fired. I can hire a caregiver.
I want my husband
I
back.
want my husband back, because you can't quit that job. At least we vowed that you wouldn't quit that job. So no, and then we got a caregiver in, and we started to take our needs more seriously, as well as our relationships.
Well, I'm excited to share the book with my sister and share that message. So let's talk about your background, because
Okay.
your background is quite different than, right? Because you've got this like princess thing going. You're probably wondering, what in the world is that an Atlanta thing? But, so talk about your background and get to your crown at some point.
Absolutely. So I was born and raised in South Florida, loved it there, never thought I'd leave. But then I went to school and found that all the things I broke as a child, I could actually get paid for putting back together. So I got a degree in networking and systems engineering at Barry University.
So like, were you taking things apart?
Oh, absolutely. I was a complete tomboy. I played football. I was athletic. I would break things on purpose and put them back together. I didn't know that was a skill set, or that I was being prepared to engineer. And there were so few women in engineering courses that I found myself in a very strongly male-dominated industry, which was fine with me, because I had a big brother, and I did so many sports that were already dominated by boys.
Okay.
So I had no idea, being that Barry was a small parochial school somewhere in the South Miami area, that I would be actually recruited by one of the largest technology companies in the country. They were the Apple of their day. So when IBM hired me and recruited me as a college hire, they eventually moved me to Atlanta, because this is where the top guns were, and they wanted their new hires to be trained by the best. And I ended up for the next 5 or 6 years traveling the world, about 80 to 90%. And during that travel, if you could imagine and believe, is where I met my husband, who was also an IBMer at the time.
Okay. So you're at IBM for 5 or 6 years.
Right.
And then what's going on? What's happening in your life next?
Well, I love my job because, I had climbed the corporate ladder in ways that I didn't expect, being kind of an overachiever. I was a worldwide project and delivery manager for Asia and Canada. And about 8 years in, I kind of went back to school, right about at the 5-year mark. But at the 8-year mark, I had completed my degree in early childhood education. So I became an educator from an engineer.
So why were you just like, do this engineering, why, I'm going to go into education? Did you have kids, or why did you go that route?
Bingo. Having been an engineer and having not had a strong upbringing that I could duplicate, I did the engineering thing. I put out a plan of action, and I asked questions and read
Are
books.
you talking about like planning a baby?
The baby. The baby had already been planted.
Okay.
But I personally had no idea what to do with the harvest. No idea whatsoever. I just really didn't have that mommy gene, if I can say that. So I was bits and bytes, black and white, asked a whole bunch of questions at a local university here in Atlanta called Kennesaw State University, to the point where they said, Yvette, just take a class. So I ended up getting a certificate, became certified in Montessori pedagogy, the Montessori teaching. And they said, Yvette, stay a little longer and you'll get a degree. And I'm so grateful for that.
So she could be a mom. She's like,
I went to
take a
school.
class on being a mom.
That's right. It wasn't even a mommy class.
Let me go for it. Yes.
A mommy degree. I didn't want to it was not my intention to have a degree, but I learned the psychology of a child, the developmental cycle of a child. So believe it or not, when my kids would fall on the ground and kick their feet up, I teared up because I knew it was developmentally appropriate and that they were okay. I saw things totally differently after graduating from KSU with an early childhood education degree. It just created in me gray, because before I was an engineer, black and white, bits and bytes. But my right brain was activated and I was able to see gray in color.
So how did that affect your, your working? I mean, were you able to see and do, because your right brain is now like fired up?
Right. It's a very good question. I don't believe that I intentionally applied that to work. Mind you, I was still a full-time employee at IBM. I was a full-time student at KSU. And now I went from 1 to 2 children during that tenure. So a lot was changing in my life. So I do believe that I tried to segment those skill sets. Didn't realize that it was a left brain, right brain type skill set. You hear we only use 10% of our brain. Who in their lifetime gets to candidly and intentionally use as much as possible, closer to 50.
Nice, good.
I'm excited.
So then what happened? What's next turn of events?
Okay, so I had been very strongly involved in community service. We had just gotten back from the earthquake mission in Haiti, and
so what did you do there?
Well, I was asked by my church to go on mission, and we were one of the first teams to arrive in Haiti, and it blew my mind because I had neurosurgeons and pediatric doctors and plastic surgeons, and to be honest, I actually cried once we arrived. We went through Dominican Republic and then had to drive to the border, and I cried when I got there because everyone was being given assignments. And I'm like, I can barely put on a Band-Aid, just learned to put on a diaper. How do I do this? Why am I here? Why did anyone even choose and suggest that I come on such an early mission? And so the next question that was asked was, well, do you speak any languages? That blew my mind. And the tears started running because yes, I spoke 5. And I'm so grateful that even though neither one of my parents could read or write, they taught me language, which in my belief is such an incredible gift to any child.
So what languages?
Okay, Spanish, English, French, Creole, Patois, and ASL.
Patois?
Patois.
What's that?
That's what they speak in Haiti. It's a broken sense of a formal language of French. So it's like Creole.
So
My parents were Caribbean.
Oh.
That's why they did not have the opportunity to go to school. It's not that they didn't want to, but I was their jewel. I was their American dream. They had me here in the United States. I gave them residency. My dad went on to get his citizenship, but my mother was too embarrassed. And I realize now in retrospect that illiteracy is an invisible disability, and hundreds of thousands of Americans live that lie.
Okay, so there's a couple of reasons that you created the invisible disability.
Absolutely.
Okay. So uncover more. So you did the Haiti.
Yes.
Okay, and then
So I returned from Haiti and received an opportunity through Harvard to be involved in the first cohort where education, the School of Education, the School of Law, and the School of Business came together to create the first ever education leadership program. It was a 3-year program after which you spend your last year in your thesis fixing a problem within the community that had to do with law, education, and
I love it.
business. Oh, I mean, like, I had never thought that I would want to pursue my doctorate, but this program was once in a lifetime, and they were very selective, and I was really excited that I was invited to apply. 6 weeks before that cohort started, the entire right side of my body went numb, and my life has never been the same.
Okay, well, Yvette, can you go ahead and expand on that?
Sure. It felt like hot fire running through my veins, actually, and obviously it constituted an emergency. So there I was in the emergency room. First they said, is it MS? You're too young for a stroke. What exactly is happening? And fortunately there was a neurologist in the ER, and he said, well, she's got pretty good insurance. Let's run a brain scan. And when they ran the brain scan, I remember the moment where I'm laying there in pain, and the doctor says to me, don't freak out. So of course, you know what I did.
Freak out,
I
of course.
freaked out, right?
Smart
And they
thing to
said
say.
to me, right? They said to me, your brain has actually fallen into your spinal cord, and it's hemorrhaging in some ways. And if we don't create an appointment for you quickly, that the pressure in your brain will break through the skull. Much like a dam breaks through its barriers.
Okay, and it's falling.
Well, I had fallen down. So if you think of the nerves on the back of the cerebellum, those were too long at birth. And over time, they got lower, lower, and lower, and pretty much covered my spinal cord opening. So the pressure I was feeling in my head that most people thought were migraines, that I thought was the stress of possibly going to Harvard, was really pressure in my brain beating up against my skull. And so my organs were not getting the CSF fluid and blood flow that it needed to function. And so they suggested I have something called decompression surgery, where they relieve the pressure, and a craniotomy, where they literally drill a hole in the back of my skull and cover it with a bovine patch for flexibility purposes.
Bovine patch, I think of cows.
That's exactly what a bovine patch is.
Huh. Okay.
I'm part mom, part queen, part cow.
And Pegues, you got the pig.
There you go.
It's like a whole family.
Yeah,
like,
I think they had something to do with
farm
that.
thing.
I think so.
Okay, so you had that operation.
I did. Walked in and never walked back out. So the belief is that I seized in my spinal column at the point of the actual decompression surgery. Now I fall into the lower, I don't want to say success rate, but there were risks, because there was neurological complications in my family, which I didn't know at the time. High blood pressure is neurological, a stroke is neurological, and here I am having brain surgery. So I never really put the pieces together, but during surgery there were complications, and so I walked in, never walked out, and now I wheel myself around.
Okay, one sec. So she had mentioned, that you can inherit, of course, all these different things with high blood pressure and strokes and everything, and they're in my family too. So make sure to ask, about your extended family. I just wanted to play that in there.
I'm glad you did.
So tell us more, like how. So you had the operation, and then your right side is paralyzed.
No,
Your
from the waist down now.
waist down. Okay.
The right side paralysis was an indicator that I was not getting blood flow and CSF
okay.
fluid through my spine. And so the decompression surgery did exactly that. It took the pressure off. In fact, it's like road construction. Unlike a cancer, which is in and of itself very complicated, they couldn't just take it out. They literally had to pull pieces of my spine out and make room to redirect this brain fluid and provide it more space, if you would, to pass through. So it was really, truly just road construction in my head to make sure that this fluid had somewhere to go. In fact, there's a second brain surgery that I'm contemplating to redirect the brain fluid into my stomach.
Into your stomach.
It's called the shunt, yes, because there's still pressure in my head and I live with chronic pain.
Okay. So let's go after the operation. So now you're paralyzed from the waist down,
Yes, and then from the shoulder up because of the brain injury.
shoulder up.
So very, my range of motion, a lot of the pressure that I feel in my head, and because it was an inherited condition, then I now had developmental disabilities and intellectual and cognitive disabilities.
Okay, so that's where, physically you're in a wheelchair, so physical, but then you have the invisible disabilities you spoke of.
Right, so this from the shoulder up were my invisible disabilities, and from the waist down in the wheelchair were very visible disabilities, and usually the only ones that people recognize. And for the purposes of triage, it was a priority. You know, the doctors wanted to make sure that I could be mobile, that I could operate a wheelchair. So that was a priority, but nobody taught me how to think again.
So then let's go to you're back at home in your wheelchair, and now you're like, oh, what is life gonna be like now?
Right. I was so sure I would break my children, because now they've gone from having this physically able, capable, like athletic and six-figure earner to just a lump on a log. And so it wasn't until my 7-year-old came home from school with a note from his teacher, and she said, well, you know, Miss Pegues, your son wants to know if you're gonna die. What should I tell him? So from that moment on, between the hours of 3:30 to about, I don't know, bedtime, I literally tied myself upright to a chair, and I stopped taking my pain meds and my muscle relaxers so that I would have the appearance of health for my children. And I never laid back down. So I faked it until I could make it. And eventually I was able to sit up on my own. I was eventually able to deal with the pain, and now I have a pretty high tolerance level, but I needed that for my children. I did not want to break them mentally, emotionally, physically, or even visually. So my children were my inspiration for me to get up, get out of bed, because up until that point, they'd never seen me horizontal. They've seen me on a horse, they've seen me snow skiing, and they've seen me playing basketball and rolling in the leaves, but never, ever laying down.
So I am thinking about my sister who's a fighter, and she's walking now. Her stroke was in November. When people have a stroke or have an injury like that, what are things that advice you have to give them to, like, okay, life is different, I don't know if I'm ever going to walk again, or like, what are things that helped you, or now that you know, I wish I would have known this?
Oh yes. My 2020 hindsight is in the book, but I also have the blessing and opportunity to be a peer support group counselor. So I volunteer at Children's Hospital of Atlanta, as well as Shepherd Center, which is where I received my recovery. So it's such an honor to be able to speak with individuals in that very same situation. And the first thing I say to them is, your life is not going to be the same. Mourn the change, release it, and allow your new normal to provide for you a world you've never seen before. Much like we started to talk about, I had to reboot my life. My neurology report said that I had lost something called executive function. How do you become or go back into what you believe you became, which in my case was an engineer, after you losing executive function with a 2-quadrant left brain injury? I had to cross that out and allow myself to develop speaking talents. I wasn't supposed to speak. Cognitively, I wasn't supposed to put sentences together anymore. So I had to technically move information from my left cognitive brain to my right emotional brain. So I realized that my intellectual quotient, that's different. It's never going to be the same. But my emotional quotient, or my emotional intelligence, had now been fired up. Now I have this part of my brain that had never been used before.
Oh.
So I had to do the 80-20 thing. I know most people think, okay, 20% of the people do 80% of the work. But how about 80% of your talents and 20% of your gifts being switched, which is what I had to do. I had all this talent and degrees and Microsoft certified and all these things that I thought identified who I was, and that was 80% of who I was and who I believed myself to be going forward. But I had to flip that and say, why don't I find my gifts and do that? No one can take that away. No one can minimize that. And it's always been there, in my opinion. I just never used it because I thought I had to go to school to be better. But you're already better. Tap into your better and live your best authentic life. And so I tell a lot of spouses that first you need to protect your relationships and make sure that that individual and the role that they played in your life remains true. And if you have children, listen to them. I had my boys make dream boards. And the first thing on the dream board was macaroni and cheese. They say, Mommy, I just want you to make macaroni and cheese again. Set really small goals and have really big celebrations when you meet them. And as a result of my children getting the best of my teacher brain as I recovered, they wrote and published their own book. And it's called My Mommy Had Brain Surgery and I'm Okay.
Oh.
Yes, and so it's a book for kids, by kids, not just about brain injury, about living in a home with a disability. And it's a resource for families who are now going home different.
Yeah.
And little kids who don't really recognize they're different. And it takes them through what it looks like for mommy and daddy to be disabled, and that it's not your fault, and that everyone's going to be okay. Because see, the thing that people don't recognize is your sister had the injury, but your entire family has the disease. But she's the only one being treated.
Right.
So you can't treat from a place of sickness. So each and every family member needs to recognize their role, their place, and responsibility throughout her recovery. It's not a one-person recovery.
Yeah, and it's hard to know. Can you tell us more about the spouse piece? Because it is how your spouse was the caretaker and like so focused on, oh my gosh, I love you so much, I'm going to do everything I can as a caretaker.
Right.
And then didn't have space for this other piece.
That's right.
Can you tell us more about that and maybe steps?
Absolutely. So men, in this case, are hammers and they look for nails. And it was the reason why I made my book, because it's very much step by step.
Yes.
You know, and my husband just got tired of rubbing my back and holding my face. He's like, this doesn't feel like enough. Give me something to do.
Yes,
that book is something to do. And it's very clear on what needs to be done, and it's result based. And the thing that I would say to your sister is, don't let him insist. I wanted to be the submitted wife, which I was happy to do, but I recognized that in submitting to his feelings, submitting to what he felt his responsibility was, made us further apart. It really pushed us further apart. And I didn't know why I really did complain for years. I didn't know why I felt lonely. I didn't know why I felt that I needed more, that something was missing, because he was amazing.
Yeah.
And I would complain, I feel alone, I feel invisible. And he would say, but I do everything for you.
Yeah.
I work from home now. I'm your caretaker.
Gifts of service.
Exactly.
Okay. But he needs something different. Yeah, okay.
Well, it was okay for me, but not for him.
Oh.
He was losing his identity.
Oh, yes.
In an effort to give me mine back.
Yes.
And I had to realize in that moment that being his wife was more important than him being my caregiver. So I had to bring in the troops, bring in people to clean my house, bring in people to toilet me, so that he can shine and rise above. He's composing music now. He's never done that before. So releasing him from the responsibility of taking care of me gave him freedom to grow. I would ask her to make sure he does self-care. Self-care is not just going to the spa, especially for men. It's finding that nail. If that nail is golf, if that nail is skydiving, whatever, if that nail is work, then allow him to be and do those things without using them as a coping mechanism. And receive treatment. And be very, very careful about your treatment resource, because talk therapy is fine, but you want to make sure you understand that I think it's 80% now, 80% of multi-ability families end in divorce, especially when the disability happened within the marriage. So you don't just need a marriage counselor, you need someone who understands your disability and what that looks like. Because if you're not careful, you can get blamed for using your disability as a crutch. Like, well, I can't do that and I need that. Oh gosh, here she goes again. You know, her poor little disability. And that's not intentional, but they understand that they also are suffering and no one is helping them. So each and every member of the family needs to be equally supported. That's why we have the book for the families and the book for the kids. And talk therapy is great, but force yourself to go out on dates, hold hands, and do the things that helped you to fall in love with each other. And grace. So my 3 things are God, grace, and education. I pray, assume that the person doesn't know better, and educate them to do better.
So tell me, the audience does not know about your crown, and I think they should. So what's with the crown? So I see you're Miss Wheelchair USA 2015. Tell us about that.
Well, when I started Your Invisible Disability, I had no idea that it would have the effect that it did. So ironically, I had just come out of the hospital. I was catatonic. I was medically mute for 3 months. The phone rings and I get invited to participate in a pageant. So I was totally against it. I said, I don't do pink. I'm an IBMer. I do black, brown, and blue. I don't wear jewelry. I don't wear makeup, because my perceived notion of a pageant was a bikini contest, lots of makeup, and just kind of a more of a pretentious event. And I was really focused on my skill sets, right? I'm an engineer, I'm educated, and all the things that were on paper, but nothing on my heart. But here's how they got me. They said, well, Yvette, I hear what you're saying, and I get it, but would you like to extend what you do on your block to the entire state of Georgia? Because you obviously care about the kids that you're working with at your local schools. You've taken your intellectual quotient and your emotional quotient to children with autism. And if you really think that's important enough to do on your block, you're good.
Yeah.
You should consider doing it in the entire state of Georgia. And that's what the local pageant would be. So, of course, I did my homework.
So, but hold on.
Yeah?
Because you said you were mute for 3 months.
Yes.
And
yes.
so how does that work?
Very good question. So the state competitions are through application. So I just had to fill out a whole bunch of papers to apply for the local title. Now here's what's amazing about the Miss Wheelchair USA organization. There's only 2 of the 4,000 plus Miss pageants, only 2 for women with wheelchairs. That's Miss Wheelchair America and Miss Wheelchair USA, the latter of which I represent. So the pageant program, Miss Wheelchair USA, is about 18 to 20 years old now, and America's about 40 years old. And so very few people, even after 60 combined years, even know that there's a pageant for women with disabilities. And here's the kicker. Your talent is your community service.
Oh.
So I was really excited to know, much like presenting my degree at a interview, that I can present to them the things that are from my heart. This organization I created because my mother had an invisible disability. I was first generation high school, college, and on my way to get my doctorate. And I wanted to be able to say, what is my service platform? What's important to me? What can I talk about until I'm blue in the face? Because as a title holder, you have to have what we call a service platform. What is the whole mission and vision of why you want to wear this crown? And I created a platform called A Legacy of Literature. Because by this time, my sons have written a book at the age of 5 and 7. They published it with, we self-published because there was no category for a nonfiction book about the brain written by and for kids. So I really felt strongly that at the age of 5 and 7, they had already accomplished what my parents had not been able to accomplish in an entire lifetime. I didn't think that it was a good enough platform because most of the other women had platforms specific to their injury, whether it was drunk driving, whether it was a specific condition. But when I said yes, I didn't say yes to the pageant. I said yes to the work.
Yeah.
I said yes to being able to spread the news about what had now become my new reality. And I said, how many other women and men and just people in general are dealing with this? Because even after about a year, I had not seen another person or been given a resource or a mentor even, to model my new life or my new normal after. In fact, I hadn't gotten on social media. I was on no social media platform until after my brain injury. Because I realized if I'm going to change the image of disability, I needed to create an image.
Yeah.
And winning Miss Wheelchair Georgia was amazing because I qualified for the national competition, which was in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio, near Akron. And when I got there, these women were beautiful. They had on makeup, their hair was flowing, they had on heels. And we say in the disability community, we're no longer a fall risk, so we can wear 8-inch heels.
Okay.
You got to find the silver lining.
She's wearing some heels that are like leopard skin and heels. Okay.
Yes. So find the silver lining. And it's ironic because, I'm a brand ambassador, so I have the opportunity to drive a vehicle that is fully adapted. After 4 years, I can finally drive myself back and forth. But my big head's on it. My picture of myself is on it. So I asked my kids, are you comfortable with mommy driving this car to your school? Is it okay? Are you embarrassed? trust me, I have 2 young boys. They would let me sleep in this crown if I could, and their fellow classmates think I'm like a big deal. But we really did have to talk about that because they were getting feedback after being in the paper, and obviously after being on your show. They will continue to think, well, Mommy, you're famous. All my friends say we're famous. We must be famous. We're in magazines. We've been on the doctor's show. Mommy, we're famous, right? I had to stop and give them a choice.
Yeah.
I said, let's look up the word famous and let's look at images of what famous looks like. And you see people making it rain, eating caviar and being on yachts. And I said, so now that you have that image in your head, what happens when we're at home? Mom, you fall, you cry, you can't get around the entire house. And I know it's hard for you. I said, well, so do the 2 look alike to you? No, Mommy. So what do we say? I said, I'd love to give you a bigger vocabulary. Maybe one that your fellow students may not have experienced because your life is different. I would say we're servants. We're servants that have been given an audience that we would normally otherwise not be able to touch. We would have normally otherwise not been able to reach. So through all this media and all this opportunity, much like the one you're providing with me today, we're able to extend our reach and our message. And to me, that's being a servant, not a celebrity. And so I asked them, is that okay? Are you comfortable? Do you believe that that's who we are? And they said yes. And so now when they're, seen on TV or when their books being ordered, they are very much of the heart and the mind of a servant, not a celebrity.
I love that.
It's hard. It's hard. And here I thought I was going to break them, but our schools teach our kids how to be head smart. Who's teaching them how to be heart smart? And I work really hard to get into the school system because I want them to see someone with a disability doing well.
Yeah.
Being happy, dressing
Yes.
up.
Yes.
I have total strangers pat me on the head and say, oh, no sweatsuit and sneakers. I'm so proud of you. Go, girl. And I'm like, I'm still married. I'm still feminine. I'm still active. I snow ski. I sled hockey. I ride horses. Why not still be all those things, And so I want those kids, especially during Exceptional Week, where children with disabilities are honored and being given a real life, actively touchable human being who is happy with her situation. In fact, there are members of my son's school who say, wow, Mommy, look at that cool car. I wish you were disabled. And to make being different cool, because that's the only thing that separates us, is important to me. But it's also important for me to tell kids, you don't want to be disabled, but we're all different. And all this says is to honor your differences and to teach you to challenge the differences that are going to continue to happen in your life. So don't ever ask to be what someone else is, no matter how cool it looks. And the parents driving really nice and expensive cars look at me and saying, so my kid wants a car with a ramp. I said, hey, they're kids. But it's a great dialogue to educate these children. Let them ask me questions, because some of them are dealing with invisible disabilities that they see around them, but there's no one to ask those questions. Let them ride my wheelchair. I usually bring a second chair with me and let them ride around and see what the coordination is needed to be able to do that. And teach them at every age how to appropriately respond to the largest people group in the country. 4 out of 6 people are dealing with disability directly. You represent that 4 to 6 because it's either a sibling, a parent, or a child, or a spouse, or yourself. And when you think that an accident, an injury, an illness, whether temporary or permanent, can change your life, then you recognize that this people group cannot be ignored. And I even speak with businesses, and I tell the businesses, you need to recognize that you don't need to change the color of your building or the items on your menu. You need to change your audience. And once you accept people with disabilities or market specifically to include them, you will see your business shoot up at least 200%, because the disability community is a more effective group than teens and tweens. Everybody's marketing to teens and tweens. We're a much bigger, much lucrative group of individuals. So don't be afraid of us. Don't get upset because you have to make accommodations for us, but recognize that it's an inclusive move to the future. One thing I've heard also is if you live long enough, you'll become disabled. Think about it, because aging falls into that same category. Or even a temporary break if you're athletic and it's a temporary disability and you're like, wow, I had no idea. So it's really enlightening. It's been enlightening for me. And I realized also that I had to be deep and wide. I know a lot about brain injury. I know a lot about spinal cord injury. But I realized I need to learn about autism and PTSD. And I had to learn about depression and suicide. I had to be just as wide across the entire spectrum of disabilities if I'm going to advocate on their behalf. But if I'm going to do a class, if I'm going to do training, I know that I'm a disability expert, and that even in this community where we are, I am helping to build not just bridges, but structures for this community, because there's architectural changes that need to be made as well as attitudinal changes. So I'm working with the city of Woodstock to build a whole new amphitheater that invites people with disabilities, their families, grandparents, and other individuals. So I'm excited to be on the construction team.
Yes, yes, and yes. And I think it's really helpful, particularly for my audience, that you are coming from, like, let's say IBM,
Yes.
and are using your business speak. And I think it's funny about the whole mom thing.
Oh my God.
And so you have that connection, and that you were a tomboy. Of clearly you don't look like a tomboy now, and so you have all these connection pieces. So that is pretty wide. Let's get to a couple of pieces of, like, how do you manage stress? Like, what do you say to yourself, or do you listen to the birds? I mean, how do you manage that?
Stress means something different to me now.
Okay.
I don't get stressed as much as I used to because I live in a constant state of pain. So I'm always in pain, but what I've tried to do with the disability is know my triggers. But I don't think that's any different from anyone else. Money is a trigger for most people. Time is a trigger for most people. Relationship is a trigger for most people. So just like I tell people with disabilities, find your triggers and you'll find your answers. Because once you know what they are, you either avoid them or you create a solution. One of the things about being disabled reminds me of a quote. The mother of invention is necessity. Necessity is the mother of invention. When you know it's something you need, something that makes you functional. As a person with a disability, knowing that just like everyone else, I have to get from point A to point B, but differently. I may have to take the long road. I would say that it keeps me on my toes. No puns intended, right?
Yeah.
So recognize what your triggers are. What are the things that take you over? What are the things that cause you stress? Right now, advocating for people with disabilities is so stress-free for me, because if someone calls me and says I need you or want you, I can say no. And you need to put yourself in a position where no is an acceptable answer. And it doesn't hit those triggers that you know will go off and take you into a whole nother place.
So identify your triggers and kind of get a safety, like almost like a trigger safety.
3 things: identify them, figure out what works when you get to that point, and definitely involve the people around you, because they can now say, oh, that's a trigger for you. They can remind you and support you, and because they're in your circle, they can help you avoid them even if they're the trigger.
So what would you tell your 25-year-old self?
I go back even further, actually, because I didn't come from a very loving home, and a hurt home hurts, but I never recognized it as such. In fact, even at 25, I don't think I realized that there was so much abuse and despair in my home. But I would say to my 25-year-old self that all of the pain and all of the hurt and anguish that you've been through is going to make what happens next easier. Because, when people say, gosh, I feel so bad for you, and oh my gosh, brain surgery and a brain injury, and oh my God, you've lost so much, it really doesn't compare to my childhood. So I built this thick skin of appreciation, right? And this gratitude for just everything and anything, that when this happened, it was like, okay, I'll deal with this like I've dealt with everything else. Because I had been conditioned, even with a negative, environment, that this too shall pass. Because we all have choices. We can either choose it to propel us forward or to push us backwards. And, people look at me and I've been told, well, you kind of remind me of a drag queen because, the makeup and the hair and the shoes, it just seems so much is overdone. And I say to them, I said, why hide it? I'm in a wheelchair. People know I'm in a wheelchair. I wear braces because the pressure in my brain is pushing my eye sockets and my jaw forward. So I have pink rubber bands on my braces. It's like, use your experience, whether it's a disability or a life-changing event, use it to propel you forward, not to keep you backwards. So yes, I overdo it because wearing this crown allows me to wear a full gown in the middle of the day. And I love my uniform. Love it, embrace it, use it to your benefit. Learn to put on your own makeup for once. It's been amazing.
And what, because I just learned how to put on makeup.
Exactly.
When I did a pageant when I was 26.
Ooh, pageant queen.
Well, and so I wasn't a queen. I was number 3. But so it's only recently I've been watching videos because I'm on TV a lot. So,
Right.
So when did you learn? Like how many years ago?
A year ago. Literally, after the pageant, I realized I can't afford to have a makeup artist. I do too much, and my girlfriend, Daphne, is really good at makeup, and when she sees me on Facebook, she calls and said, don't you ever go out like that again. People will ask you to take pictures. People will depend on you to show them that it's cool and it's okay to be disabled and beautiful. So she taught me how to put on makeup, and the rest is YouTube. Literally sitting in front of the TV and learning to put it on. And I mean, like, I had my wings would go up into my hairline, and she, you know, have someone who cares enough to tell you the truth and take your time. It's like anything else. I had to go to school to learn to be an engineer. Why not use the school of YouTube to put on makeup? And
So
you know,
this is just so funny because we're two tomboys, but I think we don't
Exactly.
we don't look like it.
No.
It's just, you know, we're trying a little bit.
That's right.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And she's a peacock in order to get the attention, so
right.
so people can talk. Oh, maybe they wouldn't talk to a person in a wheelchair in general, but like
Exactly.
you got a crown, like, oh, I may just go up to you. Oh, what's with the crown?
There's a lot of
So
fear.
it's-
You're right.
There's so much advocacy. So I love this. Is there anything one last thing you'd like to share with us?
There's always one more thing. And I would say to each and every person who's watching or subscribes to this amazing channel that you are so much more. There's something called intersectionality. And intersectionality became very important to me because I knew that I had to give credit to the civil rights movement, to the women's movement, and to the disability movement. And what it did for me is it broke me out of that box of being just one thing. You're never just one thing. You're so many things. And much like a rainbow, they can coexist and shine. Allow yourself to be all those things simultaneously, and find your gifts and nurture your gifts and be your gifts, because no one can take that away from you. It's who you are. It's in your DNA. So find it and encourage it and share it with the world, because that's what we're here, right? We're here to leave the world better than we found it.
Yvette Pegues, yes. I'm so glad we got to do this interview because there's so much behind the crown and all of this. And I'm really excited to check out the book and give it to my sister and my family and discuss it. And definitely she's a woman who goes for it. Thank you.
Thank you for letting me go for it.